I'm Vince Walsh. I'm at the ICN, a PI. I'm the leader of the Applied Cognitive Neuroscience Group, which used to be called the Visual Cognition Group, but we've changed that in the past couple of years. If I was to say what's most exciting to me at the moment, it's what I would call a convergence um, of, of sensory approaches to and cognitive approaches to a kind of common ground. There was a paper published just recently on the mapping of words in the human brain, and that looks a lot like the principles for mapping the visual world, the somatosensory world, the auditory world. And I like the idea of the brain as a helpless map maker. So whatever that organisation is, it's got some map basis. If I was to say there's another area that I'm interested in, this is why I changed the name of my group a couple of years ago to Apply Cognitive Neuroscience, is to ask, not can we do another experiment that's of great interest to the 6 people in the world who really care what you do, if 6 people really care what I do, is to ask, have we reached a stage where we can apply some of that cognitive neuroscience in the real world? So I've now taken on the challenge of working with elite sports groups, for example, and developing sports groups to ask what can we transfer to them about the principles of learning, the principles of growth, the principles of decision making and problem solving under pressure. So my own heart now beats for what we can do with it. And if I was to say there was a final area of application, it's in the realm of brain stimulation. I was a deep skeptic about transcranial magnetic stimulation and depression several years ago, but I think that jury is now in. There's an effect size of the treatment for depression that's as big as the effect sizes of any single given antidepressant. If it was a drug, we'd be going crazy for it. So in the application world, my drive is now to see if we can do that within UCL, offer the treatment to patients. So it's application and 1 or 2 principled areas that excite me at the moment. There's this kind of we call it public communication or public engagement, and it still feels as if sometimes we're proselytizing, and I think we've been overtaken by the public, and I don't think that we are any longer in control of how we have an effect because of some of the great bloggers and great websites out there. People can now access anything. So we sometimes like to think, I think, that we're having an effect in a particular way, but the public reader of what we do, I think, is determining what takes off. So growth mindset for something is, for example, is something that has really taken off in the public imagination and public domain, and I can see why. Things like, however much people might complain about it, left brain, right brain ideas have taken off in the public. Now, what do we do? Do we try and correct people, or do we try and say, well, at least people are using something from cognitive neuroscience as a heuristic? And I think sometimes there's a middle ground to be struck rather than a holier than thou merely correct ground. In the other direction, how are we affecting things in the public domain through policy and through things like and through education? I don't think we're having that great an effect. I think it's more heat than light. That doesn't mean that we can't have an effect, but in the areas of education, for example, I don't think we've yet yielded anything that teachers already didn't know. We've given them new language, new words, so that might enrich their thinking, but I don't think we've delivered anything new. And I think sometimes there's still and this is born of my experience in applying cognitive neuroscience in the real world, we still haven't got within ourselves, I think, the maturity to appreciate how dirty the real world is and how noisy it is. And sometimes we're a little bit purist in the way that we that we try and engage in those domains. So my report card for the discipline would say, doing okay, but must do better. It would be afraid and be careful. I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I think we, as PIs and mentors, have a responsibility to ask what happens to our people, our PhD students and postdocs, when they leave us. And I would say two things. One is that the stock of MSc and PhD and postdocs has massively increased, but the number of positions hasn't. So it's much harder to make a career now than it was 14 years ago, even 14 years ago when I joined the ICN. And I think what aspiring scientists should do is look us as PIs in the eye and try to take more control of what they do, because the vast majority of them are not going to get faculty positions. That's not a negative message either. It just means, how do we look at beyond the world and look beyond the academic world and ask, well, what else can they do? And I think that the students and postdocs know as much about the future as we do. So we have to ask, what skills are we tooling people up with to take into the real world? Just one example, recently a PhD student left the ICN and has gone to work with a brain training company, employing all his skills as a psychologist and cognitive neuroscientist, but also employing lots of skills in a business domain, in a soft skills social domain. And I think we should be doing more to prepare people for that. The second part of my warning is that I think, and this is something from having sat on grant committees, it used to be the case that people would work on the same stuff for 15 or 20 years in psychology. And I've noticed that the life sciences people in the biological sciences would have to retool every 5 years or so. And I think we've now caught up, and I think the half-life of whatever it is that you're working on is much shorter than it would have been for your supervisor. So choose very carefully, negotiate with your supervisor or PI to make sure that it's about your future, not about their lab, and to be prepared to shift, because the field will move around you.